All right, this morning I want to start off with a question. Have you ever been told to do something and you did the opposite? I feel like we've all done this at certain points. Now, there was an instance in high school where I was interested in a young lady. She was a nice young lady. She loved the Lord. She went to church, came from a Christian home. So she checked a lot of those boxes, right, that I knew my mom would be like, does she go to church? And she checked those boxes. And so after we went out on a few dates, I decided to bring her home. Now, in my household, it's not hard to get the approval of my mom or my stepdad. Who you really had trouble getting the approval of is my oldest sister, right? If any of you have a protective older sibling, you know how that goes. Now, this sister, her name is Sarah. She is the sweetest, most amazing person in the world. She works for Child Protective Services. She just has the best heart. But there was a problem. Every girl that I had brought home just was not good enough. And this girl, I was really interested in her. I really wanted this relationship to work out. And I bring her in, we hang out, we have a meal together. It's such an amazing time. Everybody's laughing. Maybe it was fake laughing, but everybody's laughing. And then all of a sudden, the girl leaves. She's a great girl, just to clarify, but not for me. But the girl leaves, and I go to my sister, and I'm like, Sarah, what did you think of her? And she didn't say a single word, but her face said it all. She, one of those, And I was like, okay. So I naturally, being a teenage boy, was like, I don't care what my sister says. I like this girl. She's pretty. Really, that's all it was. She's pretty. I want to continue to date this girl. But here's the thing. It kind of stuck with me, right? That face that my sister made, that stank face. So then, a few weeks later, I roll into her bedroom, and I'm like, hey, what was up with that face? Why don't you like this girl? She's like, to be honest with you, I think she's not a very grateful person. I think she complains a lot. And I was like, ooh, that's harsh. I was like, you got that in one meal? I've gone out with her how many times and you picked up on that? But guess what I did? I continued to date her for another 18 months. 18 months in high school. That's a lifetime, right? And so I continued to date this girl. And guys, I just want to tell you, it was a mess. It was a mess of 18 months. It was a roller coaster, highs and lows, highs and lows. And I remember when we finally broke up, going to my sister, and she was like, why'd you break up? It's she was ungrateful. Right? But how often do we do this in our lives where we have people that come to us with great wisdom, great insight, they tell us what we should do, and all of a sudden we're like, no, I know better. No, I know exactly what I want to do. I know what is best. And if we're the person giving the advice, if we're the person giving direction, we get so frustrated. We're like, how do you not see that this is what is best for you? And in today's series, we're looking at a character that honestly, out of all the biblical characters, he's one of the ones I dislike the most. I dislike this guy so much. But I want us to be kind, because I think as we're reading through this story over the next 4 weeks, we're going to have to look at him. We're going to look at his decisions, how he listened to God or didn't listen to God, and then we're going to need to look in the mirror and realize that we are a lot like this character. And it's going to make us uncomfortable. I told Tiana in a text about this series, it's going to be a lot of stepping on our own toes, because it's going to reveal some things about our hearts, about how we view God, how we view ourselves. So today we are talking about Jonah. Now, maybe you remember going to Sunday school and you remember this man being swallowed by a whale, and you're like, then he was spit up, how crazy. But you really don't know any more about the story. We are going to spend 4 weeks in this series. So let's go ahead and jump into Jonah chapter 1. Jonah chapter 1, if you have your Bibles, if you have your phones, you can open it up. It says this: the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai. Amittai means faithful. So he is the son of the faithful man. The son of the faithful man. All right, next verse. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. So immediately, what do we have taking place? We don't have much of an introduction into this, except we get the two main characters in this story. The main character in here is obviously God, and the other one is Jonah. And God is very clear in communicating to Jonah what he is supposed to do. What is he supposed to do? He's supposed to go where? To Nineveh. God says, go to Nineveh. So my first point today is this: God is speaking, but we don't always like what he's telling us. God is speaking, but we don't always like what he is speaking. Right here, God speaks directly to Jonah. He tells him exactly what he wants him to do. He asks him to do something, though, that makes him very uncomfortable. Now, this is not a book that focuses in on racism. It's not a book that just focuses in on racism, but there is racism throughout this book when it comes to Jonah. Jonah is looking at the Ninevites as people that are less than, as people that do not deserve God. They don't deserve his compassion, his love, and his forgiveness. And to be honest with you, the Assyrians, they were pretty wicked people. They were cruel people. They did some terrible crimes. If you remember watching the VeggieTale version of this, maybe as a kid, they were people that slapped each other with fishes. I don't know why VeggieTales decided to communicate the story in that way, but it has stuck with me my entire life. These people slapped each other with fishes. They were the worst of all of humanity. But this is who God tells Jonah to go to tell them what God is going to do if they don't repent. Throughout this story, we are going to see these characters operate the opposite of how you would expect them to. The prophet in this story, Jonah, reacts the opposite of how you would expect him to. We're going to be introduced in just a minute to sailors. These godless sailors operate in a godly way. The Ninevites, spoiler alert, they're going to repent and turn to God, opposite of what you'd expect. And Jonah, we're going to sit here and just get frustrated with him. God speaks in a way to Jonah that makes him so uncomfortable. Right now, you could probably pick a place in your head where you'd say, the last place I ever want to live is blank. And that's essentially what is happening here. The last people that Jonah ever wanted to go and communicate God's truth to, that is exactly who God tells him to go and talk to them. If you didn't know, today, Nineveh is a place we call Iraq. So it is a place that still many of us probably would not want to go. We probably would not feel like we would fit in there. We don't feel like people would maybe view our faith in the same way. And that is who God calls him to go. God speaks in a way that challenges Jonah. There's been this phrase that I've thrown around throughout my life, especially in ministry. I think right now, a lot of Christians, we seek something that is not necessarily godly. What is it that we seek? I believe a lot of us seek comfortability and security. When we look at the scriptures, though, I don't see God calling people to comfortability or security. I don't think he calls us just to get a house, get a bunch of food, build up our bank accounts, and sit there and be comfortable. God is often calling us to something more, something that challenges us so much. God rarely calls us where we are comfortable. Oftentimes we are called somewhere uncomfortable because we have to trust in who? Him. When we are comfortable, who do we trust in? Ourselves, our resources, our abilities. But when we're uncomfortable, we have to say, God, I don't know what I'm doing here. God, I am not equipped for this. God, I don't know how this is going to go, but I trust you because you have spoken to me to go. This is what we must do. When God speaks, we must listen to him, and we must be prepared for a calling that is uncomfortable, just like Jonah was in this moment. God's call isn't always convenient, and it doesn't always feel good. Do we really believe that when God calls us that it has to feel good, it has to feel comfortable? Is that what we think it is? Because honestly, that is just focusing on ourselves and what we want. But God's plan is so much bigger than us and our wants and our desires. God is asking Jonah to do an impossible task, to go to this nation that is so godless, and he's challenging him to go there, to preach this message so they can turn back to God, the one true God. And he's saying, no, that's not what I want to do. We find out later on, I think it'll be week 4, Jonah's real heart is revealed. Jonah not only despises the Ninevites and doesn't want them to turn back to God, Jonah knows that God will forgive these people, and he doesn't want that to take place. That's some hatred. That's some hatred that is in his heart. But here's the truth. When God calls us to something that's uncomfortable and we say no, it's amazing how our life can get off track so quickly. We're about to read about that. Our obedience or disobedience will determine the direction of our lives. As Jesus followers, we have to be obedient. Many of you have heard me talk about this principle over the last few months because this is the biggest challenge that I feel like I am facing right now. God, how can I be obedient to you today? God, how can I be obedient to you on a daily basis in the small things, but also in the big things? And it's amazing when we're obedient how God opens up opportunities, how he guides us, how he directs us, how we can overcome the impossible with him. Our obedience or disobedience will determine the direction of our lives. The question is there something he's calling you to do? Something that you've been resisting? Maybe it's a relationship that needs restoring. Maybe it's a relationship that you need to invest more time into. Maybe it's a step of faith you're afraid to take, or something you need to let go of. The question is, will you listen to God's call, even when it's hard, even when it's uncomfortable? The Christian life is not supposed to be comfortable. Some of you want this experience, you want to experience God in new ways, and God is saying, you're going to experience me in a powerful way if you just go. But if you're just going to sit at home and be comfortable, I don't know what I have for you. I don't know how I can challenge you when all you do is focus in on yourself and your wants and your needs. Let's continue reading. Verse 3 says this, but Jonah ran away from the Lord. Notice who he is running away from. He is running away from the Lord and headed to Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed to Tarshish to flee the Lord. Then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. All the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God. Once again, the godless sailors. All of a sudden, they start worshiping everything. They start worshiping the stars, the moons, praying to every god that they've ever heard of because they are desperate. They understand that this storm is not like any other storm they've been a part of. Remember, these are sailors. They are experts on the seas. They are experts in the storms, and they recognize that this storm is different. They understand that what is happening here is different. Once again, verse 5, all the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God. And they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. But Jonah had gone below deck where he lay down and fell into a deep sleep. The second thing that I see, running from God is exhausting, and it doesn't lead anywhere good. Running from God is exhausting. Just to help you guys visualize this, in case you're not very good at geography, it's okay. I know what country we're in. We get made fun of all across the world about how bad we are at geography. But here in your head, if you can picture it, Iraq is where he's supposed to go. Where does he end up trying to go? Spain. That's extreme. Like, those are so far apart in my head. For us in US terms, we're in New York City. To go this distance, I think it's 2,500 miles. That is going to Phoenix, Arizona. That is a far distance. That is a lot of work to be disobedient to God. That is a lot of work he is putting in. Jonah ran from God, and the further he ran, the worse things got. The more and more he tried to get away from God, escape God, the worse and worse things got. Running from God, once again, is exhausting, and it doesn't lead anywhere good. Here's the thing. The longer we run from God, the more dangerous it seems to get. I love how this is told because we even see this word that comes. It says down. He went down to Joppa. He put down money for the cruise. He went down into the boat. He kept going down and down and down and down. And this reflects a lot of our lives, right? When God has called us, we avoid it, we do our own thing, and we continue to go down and down and down. And then all of a sudden, we're in the ship below deck, and there's a storm brewing. And we're looking there and thinking, how did we get here? And it started at the moment of what? Disobedience. The further he ran, the worse that it got. The longer you run from God, the more exhausting and dangerous it becomes. So if you, in the last question, realize that God has called you to do something and you've been running from it, maybe now you're thinking, oh, things are getting worse and worse and worse. That's a tough place to be. It's a hard place to be. Because I get it. God calls us to some things that just seem so overwhelming. They just seem so hard. It seems so complicated. You don't see how there is a way. But we have to stop running because we have to remember that God's way is always better, even when it's difficult. God didn't tell him that if he went to Nineveh that it was going to be easy, but it was going to be a lot better than being on this ship with men that were godless, that all of a sudden started worshiping all the other gods. And they're looking there thinking death is at their doorstep. Are you running from God today? Are you running from God today? There's been times in my life, especially when I started feeling called to ministry, and the Lord truly began to take away things in my life that I really liked. I loved playing sports more than just about anything in my life. It was the way that I escaped a lot of the stuff that I went through as a kid. What did I do? I went outside, shot hoops. I went and played football with my friends. I played baseball. I played all the sports, honestly, to distract myself from what was going on around me. And so sports was my outlet. Then the Lord began to call me into ministry. And down south, where I grew up in Atlanta, you practice every night of the week. Well, that also kind of meant that I didn't get to go to church on Wednesdays. And at that point, we began to see my youth pastor transition out. We had nobody to lead the ministry. And they asked me to start teaching. And I remember I was like, okay, this would have been my freshman year. I remember thinking, okay, I can just leave practice early on Wednesday, go to church, do this, it'll be great. And then, guys, things got really weird. Because I stopped really wanting to go to church on Wednesdays. I would rather have played sports. But then all of a sudden, I get sick. And I didn't get sick until what was I doing? Trying out for the basketball team. I had my first asthma attack and my last asthma attack in 10 years. Literally in the middle of tryouts. I had been running, conditioning, everything had been great. And then all of a sudden, I have an asthma attack. And I'm I didn't even have my inhaler. It had been so long. I remember sitting in the bathroom of the gym and being what is happening? And then I realized, I was this isn't what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm not going to the NBA. I'm not even that tall. I'm not even that good. Why am I putting all my time and my focus into sports when I know he is calling me to something so much greater? Now, that was in high school, which is crazy, but even in those early seasons, I saw God beginning to use some of my giftings and my abilities. He was shaping some of my communication. He was bringing people around me to support me in going into ministry. But I still tried to do my own thing. And sometimes it takes an asthma attack in the gym to get our attention. We don't like the storms. But oftentimes, God has to send a little storm to remind us, hey, we're not going in the right direction. I also love that Jonah puts in so much work to escape God's plan. 2,500 miles. He didn't just stay at home. He literally was trying to get as far away as possible. It was a risky journey, right? Those rickety boats, in those seas with the storms, there was risk involved. There was finances involved. That's how desperate he was to get away from God's calling. Are you running from God today? Stop running. stop running. It's only going to make things worse. Let's continue on in our reading. This is our longest reading of today. Verse 6 says this: the captain went to him and said, "How can you sleep? Get up and call on your God. Maybe he will take notice of us so that we will not perish." Then the sailors said to each other, "Come, let us cast lots to find out who is responsible for this calamity." If you don't know what casting lots is, we were discussing this with some of the guys earlier. Imagine just taking like dice and rolling them and just putting it in fate's hand. So we actually see throughout Scripture, this is not a godly practice. This is actually, we are told not to do this, but this is how they would make decisions oftentimes. If you read how they got the last disciple, this is how they did it. So after Judas, who did they replace him with? They rolled dice, essentially, to pick the next disciple. Crazy practice, but I guess it was kind of like putting it in fate's hand. So imagine like flipping a coin to make a decision. So they cast die, and then guess what? Jonah. They cast lots, and they fell on Jonah. So they asked him, "Tell us, who is responsible for making all this trouble for us? What kind of work do you do?" This is a prophet of God. This is his occupation. This is what he has been called to do. He is the son of the faithful man, and he has not been faithful. Where do you come from? What is your country? From what people are you? Verse 9, he answered, "I am a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, and he made the sea and the dry land." In this, he is acknowledging who his God is. Who his God is, yet he is trying to escape God on the sea. He knows he can't escape him on the land, so he tried the sea, but now he is realizing this is the God over everything. This is the God that is in control of all things. This is the God that he is serving. Verse 10, this terrified them, and they asked, "What have you done?" They knew he was running away from the Lord because he had already told them so. This is kind of a sub-point. This is a sub-point, but I think it's a really important point. If somebody comes to you and they are telling you that they are being directly disobedient to God, don't let them on your boat. Don't let them on your boat. Maybe it's your inner circle. Maybe you are trying to follow Jesus and you are wanting to surround yourself with people that are like-minded, that are thinking and viewing the world the same way that you do. How often do we let people come in to our inner circle? I'm talking about those that know our deepest, darkest secrets, those that are allowed to speak wisdom and truth into our life, and they have a completely different view of God and of the world. And we let them into our ship, and we say, "We want you to help us guide our life." That is foolishness. The sailors were foolish to let this man on their ship. The man told them he was running away from God, and they still said, "Come on, brother, we want your money. Let's go." And then they got caught up in a storm. Verse 11, the sea was getting rougher and rougher. They asked him, "What should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us?" Verse 12, "Pick me up and throw me into the sea," he replied, "and it will become calm. I know that it is my fault that this great storm has come upon you." If you have a pen or if you have it on your Bible app, underline or highlight verse 12. Instead, the men did their best to row back to land, but they could not, for the sea grew even wilder than before. Then they cried out to the Lord, "Please, Lord, do not let us die for taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man, for you, Lord, have done as you please." Then they took Jonah and threw him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm. At this, the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him. How is it that in this narrative that we just read, the godless sailors did the most godly thing we have seen so far in this book? The godless men did the most godly things so far. And Jonah is just sitting there saying, "Yep, I was disobedient. Yep, I put you in a really bad position." Did we read anything about Jonah repenting? Did we read anything about Jonah saying, "I was wrong"? No, he kind of just states the facts. He just says, "Yes, I have been disobedient. Point 3, our disobedient affects others. This is a real thing that I think we aren't aware of. A lot of times we think our sin only impacts us. We only think that our disobedience, our sin, our mistakes impacts us, but all of us in this room have been impacted by other people's disobedience and sin. But why do we think our actions don't impact those around us? Maybe for those of you that are parents, you understand that your mistakes impacts your children, but this goes into every relationship in our life. Friendships, co-workers, husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend. Our decisions impact those around us. Because of Jonah, he put these men's lives in danger. The sailors were in the storm because of Jonah's rebellion. Jonah's decision to run from God had a ripple effect that impacted them. When we run from God's call, our disobedience doesn't just affect us. It doesn't just affect us. Sometimes we have sin in our life or disobedience in our life that we feel like it doesn't impact everybody else. There's different sins that we do a really good job of covering up. But I just want you to know it does impact those around you. Maybe not directly, but even if it is shaping the way that you are thinking, the way that you are interacting with other people, your disobedience and your sin hurts those around you. And as a church, your sin impacts all of us. We want to be people that are pursuing God, pursuing obedience, that we are continually becoming more like Jesus. And so for you, do not believe that you sin in a vacuum, because you do not. Your sin impacts others. The question is, do you have Jonah on your boat, or are you the Jonah on somebody else's boat? Are you the one that is causing pain and hurt in somebody else's life? Or are you even maybe right now reflecting you have somebody that shouldn't be in your inner circle right now? It's hard, especially when it is somebody that you grew up with. It's a family member, but you realize that they're toxic, that they're dragging you down, that they're causing a storm that's all around you. Right now, just reflect. Am I somebody's Jonah right now? Am I dragging other people down? Am I dragging them away from God? Is that you? Or do you have somebody maybe that's in your circle that you just need to give them the boot? Let's continue on with our reading. Last verse for us today. Now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. My last point for you today is this: God's grace will meet you in the storm. God's grace will meet you in the storm. God could have saved Jonah so many other ways. God could have done this in a million different ways. He could have sent another boat and been like, hey, we're actually going in the right direction, come with us. But he didn't do that. He saved him in the most amazing way. A whale, a big fish, we don't know what it is. It doesn't really matter. What we do know is God provided something to save him. What did Jonah deserve? He deserved to die in that storm. He deserved to drown right there where he was. But God sent a fish. What I also love is now he's spending 3 days and 3 nights in a very uncomfortable place where he has to reflect on what he has done. He has to look at himself, and he also has to look at who God is. But oftentimes when we are in the storm and God gives us these glimpses, when he does send his grace, it doesn't look the way we want it to look. We are sitting there, we are complaining that God didn't send a boat, he sent a fish. We need to be grateful that we were just saved. We need to be grateful for what God sent us, because guess what? What he is sending us, he sent us intentionally. Jonah, what we're going to look at next week, is sitting there reflecting on God and himself. My last question for you today is, how may how might God be showing you his grace through the storms you're facing? It may be in something so little. That's one of my favorite things about my job. I get to hear about things going on in your lives, different storms that you're navigating. And it's so interesting. In the storm, we just focus in on the waves. We focus in on the bad things. We complain then, oh, we got swallowed up by a fish, but you were saved. And that's why having the right people on your boat to come alongside you and say, hey, your situation right now is not ideal. It is not the best, but guess what? God sent something for you. He's trying to teach you something in this moment. Don't miss this. Don't miss how he stepped in this moment. He's providing something for you. He's trying to teach you something. He's trying to shape you and mold you for something special. Like I said, Jonah drives me nuts. I really am not a huge fan of Jonah. But God was so gracious and so kind. God knew how Jonah was going to react. He knew what was going to happen in Nineveh, yet he still gave Jonah opportunities to turn back to him. He gave Jonah opportunity after opportunity to do the right thing. And God has been so kind and so gracious to all of us. He wants you to turn back. He wants you to turn back. He wants you to trust him. He wants you to be comfortable with being uncomfortable today. I'm just going to ask you to bow your heads and close your eyes as we enter into our time of reflection.